If you have somebody that's been sitting on the fence about selling their home, I would approach them now and say, get your house on the market now, today.
So many talking heads on the YouTube channel, on the internet, telling you about how the world is going down, about how we're headed to hell in a handbasket. For once, wouldn't you be interested to know of what the actual experts have to say on the topic? Or are you going to contribute to the amount of clicks and subscriptions and likes across the board on all the different talking heads in social media, people like myself? Would it not make sense to give some weighted average, some credibility to those of whom which that have PhDs, legitimate economists, qualified analysts, giving you their professional opinion of what they think is going to happen with the housing market in the current environment? Well, if your answer is yes, you've come to the right place, because today we're going to be listening to renowned South Florida real estate economist and analyst, Mr. Jack McAbee. Mr. McAbee has been navigating the housing market for the last 30 years, and he's done a wonderful job of helping lots of investors make lots of money. And while I do not agree with everything that Mr. McAbee says, I do think it's very fair and logical to give him your attention and some credit because his track record is very good, and I think that most people would agree that his expert opinion holds some weight. And so at first, we were dealing with an inventory crisis, and then next we were dealing with an interest rate crisis, which currently puts us right in the middle of what we call an affordability crisis. And so without further ado, here is Mr. Jack McAbee.
The next real estate downturn is in progress. We had a huge housing crash that created the Great Recession that began about 15 years ago. We're not going to see anything like that, but we are going to see a recession, and we are going to see lowering of housing prices, and we're going to see a reduction of sales. It's already underway, but it's really going to hit home the second half of this year. And it's going to affect South Florida. Last year we talked about it, and I said, well, I think Boca Raton, Deerfield Beach, Delray Beach, that market is so strong that it's going to survive, and it's actually going to do much better than many other markets. And I think that's held true. There has been a reduction in the Boca market, but what we have coming up now is where all the feeder markets for South Florida, and in particular the Northeast, is going to come to a crashing halt. And that's going to affect your flow of customers. It's going to affect what they can pay, what they're willing to pay, and it's going to affect what products that they're looking at. So, let me just start by saying, prepare yourself. We're not looking at a boom. We're not looking at a continuation of the boom. We're looking at a correction. We're looking at a transition that's already underway. And pricing is always the last indicator when there's a downturn. First, you start seeing changes in the inventory and in the sales numbers. Then you start seeing where buyers are negotiating prices, where they're willing to lower their prices. It wasn't that long ago when if you had a good house on the market, you'd get 20 contracts within a few days, and many of them above list price, and people writing letters about how wonderful the house is that they want to buy and how they'll do a great job taking care of it, and please leave it in their hands. That's not going to happen anymore. Now we're going to see bidding wars in the opposite direction. Quite honestly, it's going to be, okay, cash is still king. That's been true. It will continue to be true. But we're going to see reductions in prices coming up. We're going to see fewer buyers in the marketplace, and we're going to see it switch from a seller's market to a buyer's market, without a doubt. And we are going to see a recession later this year. There's a lot of analysts that I watched closely. Last year it was split between how many thought we'd enter a recession and how many didn't. Now it's switched the other way, and there's the vast majority see a recession coming up, including some of the key figures that predicted the last downturn. We're going to go back to first a more normalized market, and then we're definitely going to get into a buyer's marketplace again this year. That's what I see coming up. Now, that's across the country. California right now, I'll tell you, the prices are dropping like a lead balloon. We're seeing markets that have dropped 20% in the last few months, just in the last few months. And this is going to continue. There's an exodus out of California right now, just as there has been an exodus out of New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and other northeastern states, all primarily headed to Florida. Now they're looking at lower prices on their current properties up north. They're looking at fewer buyers. They're looking at much higher interest rate scenario in a much more difficult and competitive marketplace. And we're looking at fewer sales. We're also seeing where companies are not allowing the remote workers as they have over the last 3 years due to the pandemic. They've got a lot of office space and they want their workers back because they're not getting the productivity from them at home like when they were in their offices. So we're not going to see the ability for people who work remotely, have jobs in New York and live in Florida again. The feeder markets for South Florida are going to dry up. Now, there's always going to be a flow. There's always has been in good times and bad. We'll be through this, but it's not going to be this boom type environment that we've seen over the last 3 to 5 years, truthfully. So I just think that it's going to bring out the professionalism in the industry. I don't know how many of you were around during the last downturn. You look at Boca Raton and the west side of town is doing terrible, and the east side is still going up in price. And, we're going to see markets like that. But overall, when you look down at Miami and you look at median sales prices for different products in Miami, condominiums have actually dropped 10 consecutive months now. So when they talk about how Miami's such a hotbed, well, pricing isn't showing that. Pricing has continued to drop and will continue to. To me, there's some basics that determine real estate markets, and supply demand is definitely one of them, but the biggest one to me is affordability. When prices are no longer affordable for the majority of the population, then you're going to see changes in the marketplace. And that's where we're at right now. When you have in Palm Beach County, I think it got up to median price of $650,000. And yet the median income is about $65,000 to $70,000. Well, you all know that banks, when they look at making a mortgage, they want 20 to 30% of your income to go towards your housing costs and 40% maximum for your total debt. Well, that's way out of control now. It's far less. It's people are paying 40 to 50% for their housing mortgage alone and much more than that. And it's gotten to the point where they just don't have any money left. And on top of that, you've got 6.75% mortgage rates now. Last year when we talked this time, I think it was between 2.5 and 3. And mortgage rates not just double, but more than double in a year. First off, it lowers the amount of people that can qualify for a mortgage. Second off, you've got people that aren't going to be able to sell their houses for near as much money. They're not going to be able to have cash to buy. They're going to rely on mortgages more in the future. And it's going to be difficult for them. And what they set their sights on the last year, they're not going to be able to buy anymore. They're not going to be able to afford. They're going to have to definitely downsize their dreams and desires and get more back to needs. These, I think, are things that are already underway. The Boca market is, it's crazy. It's, I think last year at this time, I talked about the old Boca Municipal Golf Course and how that might be a hotbed coming up because it was one of the few areas you could build a new home in a pretty good location in Boca Raton. But now the prices have jumped so high, I don't know if that's going to hold true this year. So I think we're probably going to see a reduction in prices there. Now, there's certain markets I've always felt we're going to do better than others in South Florida, and just kind of drilling down a little. Boca, Deerfield, Delray Beach, I've always felt was a very strong market. Weston's a good. Certain areas of downtown Miami have proven to be good markets, and we've seen some like Edgewater and others that used to be blighted and high crime areas that are now 24-hour-a-day restaurant, nightlife, desirable areas to live. But that's all been pushed by a huge boom and by the pandemic and by lower interest rates and temporary measures, not long-lasting measures, temporary ones. And those are all changing. So we're in a market in transition, without a doubt. And it's not transition from buyers to sellers market. It's not transition from low prices to higher prices. It's the other way around. But it's, if you're like, I'd like to move, I'd like to get a different house, but I'm looking at something much less and not in as good a location. So it would behoove me to wait or maybe do some home improvements on what I have now, because I'm not going to get that kind of financing, and it's probably not going to happen again for years. I don't see 2.5%, 3% again, probably not in my lifetime. And we will see rates come back down. I mean, my dad, when he bought his first home in 1960, the rate was 6.5%. That was considered an incredible rate. I don't think many of us in the baby boomer generation ever thought we'd see 2.5% and 3% interest rates. And I think a lot of that was artificial and it was temporary. The Fed has done this trying to lower inflation. And once we see inflation come down, then we'll probably see some more adjustments. But would ever get back down to 2.5% or 3%, especially in the next year, 2 years, 3 years? I don't think so. And you're right, there is demand, but there's not demand beyond reason. You're not going to switch houses to move into something half of what you had at a higher cost, like you just said, Marshall. We're in a transitioning marketplace right now. It's definitely going to be more in the buyer's favor coming up, but the problem once again is them qualifying. And first off, can they sell their home in New York? They thought a year ago they were going to sell it $1 million, and now they're finding out they can only get 700 for it, or maybe less. Are they going to be able to? What if it takes them a year to 2 years to sell that house now instead of 30 days like it has been? What if their company says, no, you can't work remotely? These are all temporary variables that came together, I think, for this boom. And like I said, we're transitioning out of those temporary variables. When you look at Miami, that's been a hotbed and has international desirability, and you see where the condos have come down 10 consecutive months, you don't read that much in the papers, but that's what happened. We're going to continue to see that. You and I had this conversation about a week ago that a lot of this is also going to be determined by product segment. I think single family homes overall are going to do better than condominiums because there's just such scarcity of available land to build anything new. So we've got a static inventory and we've got a lot of demand for single family homes. The condominiums, they're just building them every place they can. There's so many, and once again, we're looking at an excess inventory under construction. I just read about somebody wants to build a new 300 unit one across from Brickell Center starting at, $675,000. And I thought, what are you, crazy? That just isn't going to happen. You're late to the game. And like many condo developers in the last downturn, they lost their assets or they went out of business. They went bankrupt. We're liable to see that happen again to some developers that have been overly optimistic about how long that this marketplace would stay. But that's their job. I mean, to be a developer, you have to be optimistic. Well, we've got a recession coming up. It's not that the real estate's inducing the recession this time like the last go round, but the recession will affect real estate nonetheless. I think the recession is probably going to last at least 3 or 4 quarters, probably a year before we start seeing things get better. I wish I had a clearer picture in my crystal ball of that, better than what things have been, maybe not as good as they are now. I remember if you bought a house in 2006 at the height of the market, after it crashed, you had to hold on to that house for 11 years for it to come up back to the price that you paid for. Now, we've seen a lot of people that bought it at the right times. If you bought it in 2012, you've held on to that property for 10 years, you've made some good money. But it's paper money, it's on paper. It doesn't matter until you sell that property, whether you realize it. I just think we're definitely headed for a recession. Will it be as severe as the Great Recession? No, I don't think it will. Are real estate values going to come down? Yes, they've already started to. They will continue to. Is there any place that will be bulletproof, that will be a bubble against it? No, probably not. It's just going to be to what degree it gets affected. We're going to see some markets, I think, that do come down 30, 40%. We may see certain product types that come down 50% in different areas around the U.S. So that's pretty severe. Now, where you guys are, you're in one of the greatest places to be for real estate. Are you bulletproof? No, you're not bulletproof. Just talk to people in West Boca. They're not feeling very bulletproof right now. I think the East Boca market is going to be somewhere between 5 and 10%. I think West Boca is probably going to be more like 15 to 20. Delray Beach, I think it's pretty much the same thing. Those three cities I kind of lump together. You've got other areas, that may fare okay. Like you get out in the Green Acres area, you get out in Northwest Palm Beach County where there is vacant land, and we're liable to see more single-family homes go up there at more affordable prices. So those areas may do okay. I think the condos are in for a fall. There's so many of them, and in my book, there's so many of them that are way overpriced. It used to be everywhere along Dixie Highway between West Palm Beach and Miami was like the highest crime, the most blighted, the most murders, the lowest priced areas. And they were predominantly minority areas. And now look at them now. I mean, you've got homes that are selling that were $40,000, $50,000 not that long ago that are selling at $250,000, $300,000. It's crazy. Once again, it gets down to affordability, things being overpriced, supply and demand. We're definitely seeing a switch, more supply, less demand. That will help affordability in the long run, but prices have to come down for that to happen. And that's where they're headed. Some markets, as long as we don't get hit by a hurricane or there isn't any flooding or something, some major natural or unnatural crisis hits the waterfront, it's still going to do well because people, if they have the money and they can afford it, they want to live as close to the beach as they can. 10 years from now, that may be an entirely different story. But at least for the time being, and especially boomers that figure they're not going to live that much longer, they want to live the nicest place they can during that time, they're still going to look for eastern locations. We've seen a lot of golf courses that have come and go in recent years, so I'm not so sure that the country clubs have the desirability that they used to have. I mean, there's some that have incredible amenities, great schools that have desirability, but I think they've gotten way overpriced as well. We're definitely, I would say, closer to the waterfront is probably going to fare better. The further away you get, probably the bigger decrease in prices and in values. South Florida has always been, the real estate market has been a roller coaster ride. It's been peaks and valleys. It's been mountains and plateaus. It's never been a steady marketplace. Things are good, we overbuild, and ends up giving too much inventory. Prices go up. When you look historically at real estate over the last 100 years, normal appreciation over that time is 3%. When you start seeing double-digit increases, especially 20% increases in a year, you know that that's artificial and it's temporary. And there's going to be adjustments in the future because it causes things to be unaffordable. You have to look at basics. What can people afford? Are the cash buyers cashed out? Are we still going to see this incredible migration of people with a lot of money coming down and buying? I think those things are changing. Florida will always benefit by people from the north moving to the south. That'll continue. It's funny because most of the people coming down from the north are coming from blue states. They're all coming down to what is considered probably the biggest red state in the country right now. But the climate is so good, no state income taxes. There's a lot of very positive things for Florida that I think will keep people moving there from all over. But it's just not going to be this, like I said, huge migration that we've seen in the last 5 years. That was unnatural. It was abnormal. It's not something that's going to continue. And if you think it is, well, I think you're being a little foolish. In the long run, if you have somebody that's been sitting on the fence about selling their home, I would approach them now and say, get your house on the market now, today, because it's better for you today than it will tomorrow or the next day or the day after that. From a buyer's standpoint, I think this is good news for buyers, but generally they think when things start going down, they're going to keep going down. And so it behooves them to wait a little longer to get a better price or to get better circumstances or better terms for their purchase. So it's just going to be a more difficult market, but the truth is the real professionals do the best in these kind of markets. agents, they end up getting a bigger share of the marketplace because they understand it, because they work harder, because they know how to talk to buyers about buying and sellers about selling. But right now, I think, if you have a buyer that's been sitting on the fence, or seller that's been sitting on the fence about selling, man, I'd get on the phone and I'd say, we need to talk about this because it is in your best interest to put this house on the market now. So that may help you get some listings right away and some sales, because what they think they can get for that property now, 3 or 6 months from now, they won't come close. Before we see it return to a real positive marketplace, I think it's going to take probably 5 years. And it may take longer for prices to come back up to where they are at today's levels.
So there you have it, my friends. Do you agree or disagree with Mr. McAbee's commentary? I'm interested to know what you think, so go ahead and leave a comment in the description box below and let's talk about it. Also, if you found this video to be interesting and entertaining, don't forget to like, subscribe so you can be first to be notified whenever I drop brand new content like this. Also, don't forget to share this video with somebody who you think might find it to be useful and interesting. As always, many blessings.